Most people go into the wilderness to be alone. Out there, you can walk for days without seeing another soul. But how would you ever know if someone saw you? In the spring of 2008, an 18-year-old from Oregon named Matt, fresh out of high school and inspired by the movie Into the Wild, decided to take on a solo backpacking journey most experienced hikers would never attempt. The entire California section of the Pacific Crest Trail, 1,700 miles, starting at the Mexican border and ending at the Oregon line, all by himself. Matt wasn't reckless. He'd grown up hiking all over the western United States, marked trails, dangerous backcountry alike, country with cougars and bears and unmarked cliffs. He knew how to hang his food, how to read a map, how to handle himself when things went sideways. He was exactly the kind of person who's supposed to be safe out there. For the first several weeks, the trail gave him exactly the trip he'd imagined. He'd walk from sunup until his legs gave out, pitched his tent wherever the day ended, slept hard, and did it again. Deserts, mountain passes, days at a time without seeing another human being. His worst moments were a bout of dehydration and a rattlesnake he nearly stepped on. That was the entire list. Then about 150 miles from the finish line, he walked into Lassen National Forest. The trees in Lassen grow so dense and so close to the trail that hiking through it feels like walking down a hallway. Green walls on both sides, 100 feet tall, pressing in tight. Even at midday, the light comes through dim. It's quiet in there. Birds, insects, that's about it. Matt actually liked it. It felt like the forest had closed the door on all the unnecessary distractions back home. The trail was extremely windy in this section. The trail banked hard to the right, and he came around the bend and stopped. 20 feet ahead, just off the side of the trail, two people were sitting on a boulder, a man and a woman, middle-aged, both of them dressed head to toe in white. No hiking gear, just filthy, worn-out white clothing, like they'd been living in it for months. The man had a long, wild, unkempt beard, and the woman had matted hair, almost like dreadlocks, but unintentional. Both of them were staring directly at him. They weren't startled or curious, they were just staring, like they'd been waiting all day for someone to come around that bend. Matt dropped his eyes and kept walking. As he passed within a few feet, he glanced up, gave an awkward smile, raised a hand, and said, "Hi." He got nothing in return. Not a wave, not a nod, not a flicker of expression from either one of them. Their heads just turned slowly, tracking him as he went by. You can go days without passing another human being on the Pacific Crest Trail. Matt hadn't seen a single soul in days himself. When you finally do cross paths with someone that deep in the wilderness, there's a code. You nod, you say hello, you ask how they're doing and if they need anything. Everyone does it, but not them. They just watched him. He could feel their eyes in the back of his neck long after he passed, that prickling physical certainty that someone is still staring right at you. He told himself maybe they were foreign and didn't understand him. Maybe it was none of his business. He kept walking and never looked back. That evening, the trees crowded the trail so tightly that there was nowhere to pitch a tent without blocking the path. So Matt did what any experienced hiker would do. He turned off the trail and pushed about 300 feet into the forest, through brush no one had any reason to walk through. He found a small clearing, he set up his tent, he cooked dinner on his camp stove, he sealed his leftover food in a waterproof bag, tied a cord to it, and hung it high in a nearby tree, 15 feet off the ground. If you've never hiked in bear country, tying your food high up in a tree away from the trunk outside of camp is the best way to keep the bears out. The last thing you'd want coming into your camp in the middle of the night is a hungry grizzly bear. Or so Matt thought. By the time he crawled into his tent, the forest was pitch black, the kind of dark that your eyes never adjust to, because there's absolutely no light to adjust to. He woke at first light, unzipped the flap, and looked out. His food bag was gone. It wasn't knocked down and torn open on the ground. It wasn't dragged into the brush trailing shredded plastic. It was gone, cord and all. Matt walked over to the tree expecting bear prints, because a bear was the only thing that made sense. He circled the trunk, scanning the dirt. No bear prints. But this was far worse. There were boot prints. 2 sets. Neither of them his. As he stood there staring at them, his eyes followed the prints away from the tree, and his stomach dropped. They didn't just lead to the food. They crossed the entire campsite. They walked right up to his tent and circled it, all the way around. Close your eyes for a second and put yourself in Matt's shoes. You went to bed in absolute darkness. You woke at dawn, which means that at some point in between, two people navigated 300 feet off an unmarked stretch of trail through dense forest and thick brush, in total blackness, straight to your campsite. They walked straight up to your tent, watched you sleep. They found your food, got it down out of a tree, and left. And they did all of it without making a single sound. Matt packed up faster than he ever had in his life, forcing himself to move calmly while every nerve in his body screamed that he was being watched from the tree line. He made it back to the trail and headed north. For 3 days, nothing happened. The forest opened into bright meadows and closed back into dark corridors, and there was no trace of the people in white. And little by little, Matt talked himself down. Maybe they were homeless and hungry. Maybe they were two strange people living a tough life in the woods and they needed that food more than he did. Fine, let them have it. It was over. On the 4th night, he had to camp deep off trail again, but this time he added something new. Before he climbed into his tent, he gathered armfuls of dry sticks and laid them in a wide ring all the way around his campsite. A perimeter, an alarm system. Nothing can reach his tent without stepping on one, and in a silent forest at night, a snapping stick is as loud as a gunshot. He checked the ring for gaps, then zipped himself in, and eventually he drifted off to sleep. A few hours later, his eyes opened in the dark. He didn't know what woke him, but he lay perfectly still in the blackness, listening to nothing. Then his stick snapped. His heart started slamming against his ribs. He eased his arms out of the sleeping bag 1 inch at a time and closed his hand around the handle of his hunting knife. The footsteps kept coming, slow and unhurried. Whoever it was had just announced themselves in the loudest way possible, and they did not care. Step after step, closer and closer, until they stopped directly beside the tent. 1 foot away, a single layer of nylon between them. Matt lay there, knife in hand, unable to breathe. And then the whispering started. Not from the person standing over him. From everywhere. From every direction in the forest at once. Dozens of hushed voices, overlapping, hissing over one another, and building. Faster, more urgent, more frantic. As the whispers swelled, the footsteps beside his head began to move, circling around the tent. Around and around while the whispers swirled through the trees like the forest itself was talking. Matt was frozen. The knife that minutes later he was confident in now felt useless. His whole body had simply shut down. He was waiting for the wall of the tent to tear open. And then there was silence. All of it stopped at once. The footsteps, the whispering, everything, cut off in a single instant, like someone flipped a switch. And somehow, that felt worse. Because there was no retreating footsteps, no fading whispers, no sound of anyone leaving at all. Whoever had been standing beside his head hadn't walked away. As far as Matt's ears could tell, they were all still out there, standing perfectly still in the dark, inches away, waiting. He lay awake the rest of the night, listening for a departure that never came. At first light, he burst out of the tent with his knife ready. The clearing was empty, and for one merciful second, he let himself wonder if he'd dreamed it. Until he looked down. Boot prints, everywhere, crossing the campsite, weaving through his stick perimeter, circling his tent in a clean, complete, unbroken track. He packed up and moved north as fast as his legs would carry him, checking over his shoulder all day, telling himself the same thing over and over. I gotta get out of Lassen. I gotta get out of their territory. By late afternoon, he'd crossed out of the forest, and that night he camped on the edge of a small town as close to other human beings as he possibly could. Lying there, he couldn't stop his mind from racing. The first night, fine. They saw him, they followed him, they took his food. Weird, but explainable. But the 4th night broke that explanation. That meant they had tracked him for days while he was actively watching for them, without ever once being seen. It meant they'd found a second unmarked campsite hundreds of feet off the trail in total darkness again. And it meant whatever they were doing out there had nothing to do with his food. They hadn't taken anything this time. They just terrorized him for hours and left. The next morning, Matt seriously considered calling his family to come get him. But he was roughly 100 miles from the end of a 1,700-mile journey. He hadn't come this far to quit. He shouldered his pack and walked into the Mount Shasta forest. Mount Shasta has a reputation. People vanish in that forest at a rate that doesn't make any sense. And the reports that stay with you aren't the ones about lost hikers. They're the ones from their companions. People who swear they looked away from a hiking partner for a few seconds, turned back around, and found the trail empty. No cry for help, no trace, no body, ever. Despite search teams combing every ravine, they never find a body. That's the forest Matt had just walked into. For 3 days, he kept his head down and hiked brutal miles. Nothing even touched him. Then, on the 4th day, the trail climbed high onto an open mountainside. The trees thinned out. For the first time in weeks, Matt could see for miles, the trail stretching out behind him in a clear afternoon light. Out of habit, he turned and looked back, and far in the distance, miles back down the trail, 2 small white dots were moving steadily toward him. 50 miles or more from that boulder in Lassen. Days of hard hiking, and they were still coming. Matt yanked out his map, and it made everything worse. He was standing in one of the most isolated stretches of the entire trail. The nearest civilization, a tiny town called Castella, was 25 miles away. There was no shortcut, there was no one to flag down, there was just him, the trail, and the people in white. He put the map away, took one last look at them, turned and ran. He ran for hours. He ran long after he'd lost sight of them. He ran through sunset, and he kept running into the dark until he physically could not see the ground under his own feet. Only then did he stop, stagger off the trail, and again push hundreds of feet into the black forest. He found a clearing, he pitched the tent with shaking hands, he laid his stick perimeter, and he climbed inside with his boots still on, fully dressed, knife at the ready, but ready to run. There is no way, he told himself, no possible way they saw where I left the trail. Not in that darkness, not this far in. Hours passed in total silence, and finally his exhausted body began to win. His eyes got heavy, he started to drift, and then a stick snapped, and the whispering rose up out of the forest all around him, instantly, everywhere, like it had been waiting for him to close his eyes. But this time, there were no footsteps accompanying the whispers. Matt's body moved before his mind could catch up. He tore out of the sleeping bag, ripped the zipper open, and exploded out into the darkness, screaming, raw, wordless noise, slashing the air with his knife, trying to look big and sound dangerous, trying to be more trouble than he was worth. He stopped, chest heaving, listening. A stick crunched directly behind him. He tried to spin around, but before he could, he was hit hard in the back. He tumbled to the ground, his knife sailing through the darkness and out of sight. Matt scrambled to his feet and started running, blind, headstrong through pitch black forest. No trail, no light, no direction except away. Branches tore at his face. He slammed off tree trunks, hit the ground, got up, kept going. Pure adrenaline doing the thinking. After 3 minutes of a flat-out sprint, he stumbled and went down hard at the base of a huge fallen tree. He felt, more than he saw, that it was propped up on a rock. There was a gap underneath. Without thinking, he slid himself into it, pressed flat against the cold ground, and turned his face toward the direction he'd come from. And out there in the dark, he could hear footsteps. 2 sets, searching for him. Matt lay under that log without moving a muscle, and listened through the forest. Closer and closer and closer, until they swept just feet from where he lay, close enough he could feel the footsteps. He stayed under that log for the rest of the night. When the sun came up, he questioned whether to get back up or just stay there. It was almost noon before he finally crawled out, and even then, he never went back for his campsite. His tent, his pack, his gear, he abandoned all of it and ran. Out and down the trail, 25 miles on no sleep and no food, all the way back to Castella. From there, he hitchhiked to the town of Mount Shasta, walked straight into the authorities, and told police and the Forest Service everything. They took his report, they put him up in a motel, and the next day his family drove down from Oregon and took their son home. Months later, Matt called back to ask if they'd ever found anything. Other hikers had come forward, a number of them, reporting food and gear gone by morning, from Lassen to Mount Shasta. But that's where the similarities end. No one else reported a figure charging out of the dark or whispers in the night. To this day, nobody knows who the people in white are. Nobody knows what they wanted with Matt, and nobody has ever explained how 2 people on foot followed a man for almost 100 miles, night after night, hundreds of feet off the trail, unmarked clearings, in total darkness with no flashlight. The trails through Lassen and Shasta are still open. Hikers still walk them alone and camp off trail in silence and trust the dark to leave them be. But somewhere out in that dark, as far as anyone knows, the people in white are still watching. If you enjoyed tonight's story, please hit the like and subscribe button. It really helps. I post short 90-second stories just about every night and one deeper dive just like this one every week. So if you want more of these, subscribe, turn on notifications so you don't miss the next one. Thanks for watching. I'll see you guys next week.